to get off their campaign. And unfortunately for them, they let the Irish National Schools Trust in the door, even though they said, well, we might be a bit full, we don't know if we have room for you. But we got in. And I asked a question through the chair, who was Dr. Martin Mansfield, where I spoke about the foundation documents for the schools, our national schools. And the foundation documents, we have been to the National Archives, and in the National Archives, the primary schools, they talk about primary schools, but they're actually called, technically they are national schools. And in every single one of them is the word, a bona fide promise to not discriminate on grounds of religion. A bona fide promise. And a bona fide promise, as any lawyer like Ivana would know, and this and the other, is a higher form of a promise than others. Now, each document has that. Then I asked the question of the Iona Institute, could you answer about the leases for the schools? And the leases for these national schools, these primary schools, every single one of the 3,200, each and every one of them doesn't mention religion at all. Now, most of those leases have been hidden from scrutiny. We in the Irish National Schools Trust, because we have been at this for 15, 16 years, have one of the original leases, which we have circulated. The new leases that are trying to change the schools in this divestment, which I actually think is going to lead to more apartheid than less. The leases that the Catholic Church wants are 30-something times mentioning the word Catholic in the lease, in the new. Now, for 9 years, the Attorney Generals have refused to allow the Minister of Education to sign this. This legal argument and debate has not been brought properly into the public domain. People don't understand what our national schools are. There's another assumption there, and I heard you mention about ownership.
Yes.
When we actually went in to check out the ownership, it's not the freehold, free simple ownership that you'd normally expect, that you own your own house and you can do what you want with it. It's a very more nuanced. In actual fact, a lot of the national school sites were provided by benefactors for educational purposes and will be challenged on charitable grounds alone. Out in Clontarf, where we come from, it was the local Protestant landlord who gave the site continuously, and gave different sites over time to the school, free, just on a lease, for educational purposes. So there's an awful lot to be discussed. Now, I was in the Dáil the other day. There's one final comment. When Éamon Ó Ríordáin knocked down the amendment to get rid of 7.3c, but he was looking up at us, and he actually called for a vote because he might have got outside the Dáil if he did have it at whatever time. He said there's a constitutional difficulty of getting rid of 7.3c. We in the Irish National School Trust understand that, or we believe we understand it. 7.3c, there is a right by parents in the Constitution to educate at home. There is also a right for parents, right, to send our kids to private schools. There's about 50 of them in the country, right? Those schools are protected by 7.3c because they can't discriminate. These are privately funded, no state funding. But all the others, all the national schools, the 99.9%, 7.3c needs a clarification amendment that it doesn't apply to the state-funded national school. That will resolve the problem. I've spoken to Johnny Coolan and people like that, and he says to me, there is no political will, and there is no political will. Politics is weak when it comes to solving these problems. I think anybody in politics will know that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Might let Ivana respond if she wants.
Yes, thanks. Well, briefly, thanks for that, Dennis. And I think your point about the leasehold just illustrates the difficulty with ownership. And I know Paul Rowe will be able to tell you a lot about negotiating lease problems, and certainly in our own experience in Canal Way, huge issues around negotiation of transfer of lease, despite the fact that the religious orders owe the state millions in unpaid monies for the redress the state had to pay for institutional abuse of children over many years. But that, that's a whole other story. So it's a hugely difficult process, and it's really hampered divestment, which I think could have otherwise, had there been goodwill there on the part of the religious authority, divestment could have offered a real way forward for us. And it's really, I think it's awful that it hasn't, and I think the churches and religious orders need to be called out on it. On the other issue you raise about political will, I agree with Owen's analysis. I don't believe a constitutional amendment is necessary to amend, a constitutional referendum is necessary to amend Section 73C, and I also agree with his analysis on marriage equality. In fact, I took the case I was the lawyer for Catherine's opponent, Annalise Gilligan, where we argued in the High Court that you didn't need that you didn't need a constitutional amendment to allow gay couples to get married, because the Constitution didn't define marriage as between a man and a woman. And I still believe legally we were right. However, as I think Owen will agree, the political reality was a very different matter. There was no way we could pass legislation. I introduced a bill actually on marriage equality. There was no way we could have got support from Fine Gael for that and got it passed through the Dáil Challenge, because the political will wasn't there to do it without the backing of the constitutional referendum. And of course, historically, it was hugely important that we were actually the first country in the world to democratically endorse marriage equality. I do think that it was the right strategy in the end. Section 73C, I think the difficulty again is a political difficulty. Labour is in favour of the amendment, as we've heard. Fine Gael is not. It's one thing to introduce a private member's bill, as I know, I've done quite a number of them. It's quite another thing, as we found with the Humanist Bill, to get political support from the majority partner in government to ensure we have a majority in both houses of the Oireachtas to pass it. That's the political reality. And we've been able to move on a whole range of different social changes that we've talked about, and others too. But to get I think it will be in the next government, and it will require political will in that government to change 73C. And again, the backlash is immense. Owen says Rule 68 is important. Try telling that to the people from Fianna Fáil and the Independents who attacked me this week for daring to welcome the abolition of Rule 68. Huge antipathy towards this abolition. You'll see more of this. And I must say there wasn't much support from me from Fine Gael either. So that's the political reality that we face. But let's not underestimate the intransigency of the status quo on this one.
April?
Yeah, just to come in on that point a little bit. The Irish National Schools Trust have pointed out numerous times there are of course huge complexities around the ownership of schools and around these leaseholds, and issues that make the issue of divestment very difficult. But I think that illustrates more than anything the need that we have to have equality within the current system. So whatever the history of the system that we have now, we're stuck with it. And we need to work within it and try to achieve equality for everyone within it. Because parents like Nikki and like all of the other parents in our organisation, you'll be reading about their stories over the next month, they need equality now. There's no point in getting equality for them in 20 years' time, because Reuben won't be a child anymore then. Reuben will be 20 years old, and there's not much point getting him a school place then. So we need equality now. There are young people in this organisation like myself, like Ronan, who don't have children. And one of the huge driving factors for us is that we fear that the law won't have changed in 10 years' time when we have children, or 5 years' time. And we'll be going through the ordeals that Nikki has gone through now. So we need to try and work to create equality of access and equal respect within the system that we have. And that's what education equality is all about. In terms of gathering political will, that's why we're here today. So we need our politicians to stand up for equality, but in order for that to happen, we need the people to demand it. The politicians aren't going to off their own bat decide, actually lads, come on, we'll create equality. We need people to demand that. So it's wonderful to see Equate here today. It's amazing that there's two new organisations that formed right at the same time on this particular issue. It just shows how important it is. So let's make as much noise as we possibly can, each and every one of you, to try and get that political will up and running over the next general election campaign.
Yeah. Paul has hand for a while.
Paul from Educate Together. I suppose really the first thing I want to say is just how delighted I am on my own behalf, on behalf of the whole membership of Educate Together and all the people, dare I say it, of my hair colour, who've been trying to raise this issue over decades. And it's just wonderful to see a whole new batch of younger people, new parents, prospective parents, actually having the courage to come together to really make this the issue that it has been deserved to have been for many, many times. I mean, this is just around about the time, 10 years ago, where Educate Together became so frustrated with the response of the Irish Oireachtas that we took this issue to the United Nations under the Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and got the recommendation that the state should massively increase the provision of multi-denominational and non-denominational schools and end the religious discrimination in access to state-funded schools. What I really wanted to say is that I think there are lots of different views in terms of tactics and where this should go, but we're delighted to see this, if you like, this alliance, this confluence on this particular issue, and it's wonderful to see. From Educate Together's point of view, we have been working this particular issue for a very long time, and the legal complexities, to our mind, boil down to what we call a triple lock. There is laws which could be changed, there's constitutional provisions that could be changed, but underneath it there is a fundamental reality of real estate, which is the way in which the entire system is locked to discriminate against religious freedom. And so what we are really committed to do is to work with others to provide as much choice as we possibly can, whilst those other legal and constitutional issues are being approached. And from that point of view, I mean, we really have to tell the truth here, is that, for example, Educate Together's development funding for new schools for 2016 has been reduced to zero by the current administration. And it's just impossible for us to work with parents in approximately 30 areas where there is viable demand for new Educate Together schools now. Nicky Murphy's, Dublin 612 is an area where there is viable demand for 3 new Educate Together schools, and we could be moving forward to provide them for next September if we're given the resources to actually do so. And this has to become a really vital political issue for the next administration. This is something which is fundamental to any definition of a democratic state, that it should be utterly indefensible that a state continues to violate its own constitution by compelling parents against their conscience or lawful preference to send their children to schools which are designated by the state. This is something which is absolutely unacceptable, and we must all, as a society, make sure that anybody who's looking for a vote in the next election takes this as a prime consideration.
Okay. We'll go to Lee, and then very briefly, and back to the lady here, because we're short on time for the room.
Lee Daly, I'm actually an alumnus of an Educate Together school before it was even Educate Together in the South City School Project, and actually our building burnt down at one point, and our search for real saving for a new building was blocked at every turn by exactly who you would think it would be in terms of patrons of existing religious schools. I'm 30 years old now, and it's amazing to me that we're still sitting here debating exactly basically the same thing. My question is sort of a tactical one, I guess, and it references our friends in the Owen Institute. The argument seems to be coming from those sectors is there's not a demand, either overall or within certain sections, from the patronage surveys for transfer of patronage, and therefore extrapolating from that there isn't a demand from the majority, again relying on the same argument that it's the majority is okay with it, therefore it's fine, for a change in patronage. I'm sort of wondering what are the panel's thoughts on how exactly we sort of change that, because I think it's quite a damaging argument, and it seems to be one that's very common, which is, well look, most people are satisfied with the system how it is, let's just leave it, there's no demand for change. I think that's something we really need to negate. I think the other damaging thing to say as well is it's only a demand within certain sectors, for instance certain parts of Dublin, rather than the entire country. I think there's really something we need to get around. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on how to do that.
We might come back to that and just take the two very quickly.
Do you mind, sorry, I know I have the mic, do you mind if I interject with one quick question that's always annoying me as a parent? The microphone, so I'm going to take this opportunity. Firstly, I'd like to thank Nikki for pointing out that your son's interest in Thomas the Tank Engine doesn't interfere with the school's ethos. As a parent of a daughter who's going to be going through this mess of an admission system next year, one thing that's confused me about Section 7C is that yes, denominational schools can discriminate, but at the end of that it says if it is proved that it is against the ethos of the school. So I'm interested to see, if my daughter is refused, how schools prove that her interest in Thomas the Tank Engine or Jake and the Neverland Pirates will affect the ethos of the school, because we know that in areas that aren't oversubscribed, having non-Catholics in the school doesn't affect the ethos. And I'd be also interested in your refusals, Nikki. How did the school prove that Reuben would interfere with the ethos of the school?
Will we get the final comments and come back to you all for some? So maybe just, if you can keep brief.
I won't need the mic. Mike McGillan, co-founder of the Campaign to Separate Church and State 29 years ago, now campaigning as Citizens to Separate Church and State. We took the State Attorney General and the Minister for Education to the High Court, and then on appeal to the Supreme Court over the a constitutional issue of the endowment of religion by the state paying salaries to people in holy orders, in other words, chaplains in community schools, and we lost in both High and Supreme Court. Can't understand how, but anyway, I think leases have been mentioned by Dennis. We have got, the political system has got to force the publication of every school lease in the country. Those have to be put out into the public domain so that we know the origins of ownership and the claims to ownership. Then the next thing is that Minister O'Sullivan rescinding Rule 68 is not going to change anything. It's purely symbolic, as other people have said. And as Owen has said, it needs legislative change in the Education Act. Because the textbooks that are used in the schools display the religious spirit that's vivifying the whole school day. So you've got to change the textbooks as well. And it's great to hear Paul from Educate Together, but to add to what Paul was saying, and then I'll stop, you cannot form a publicly funded primary school or national school in this country unless you teach religion in the school. The state will not fund you. You have to teach, no Paul, you have to have religious education. Yeah,